students, parents, and other distinguished guests. It gives me great pleasure and an honor to be asked to deliver the convocation address. A convocation is a very special moment in the life of a student. You have completed what is, by most standards, a very difficult training program, and accept my congratulations for having received the degrees which have just been conferred upon you. This event marks the completion of your course of training and also marks the beginning of a professional life in a career in one of the most fundamental of social sciences. Arthashastra or economics has had a distinguished lineage and has also been from the earliest texts an integral part of statecraft, a facet of the profession which maybe in your training sometimes you lost sight of, but is what I would like to dwell on a little bit in the course of this address. And I also hope that some of you, if not all, in your careers will engage with this traditional element of the profession. My professional career has been that of an academic, but in my work I have engaged with the problems of using economic analysis to formulate social policy. This task poses a number of challenges, and one of which is about language and the problems of communicating economic concepts to policymakers. In my address today, I would like to explore some of these disjunctions of language. Economics as a discipline has developed a number of concepts for its analytical purposes. These include terms like cost, profit, income, and most recently poverty. We use them in our professional discussions, and by and large there is very little problem, as most economists understand the underlying common meaning. Unfortunately, when economists engage in dialogue with non-economists, especially policymakers, they continue to use the same terms. Now, the impression the economists have that they have the same meaning to all audiences. This assumption then forms the basis of a number of errors and confusions. Some of these errors are compounded when economists use concepts which do not have an agreed meaning even within the profession to analyze issues of public policy. Because then disagreements amongst economists add to the noise of the political process of policy making. So let me take up these errors, and I will take two examples to illustrate some of the dilemmas and confusions created in this process. I hope in this process I will lend maybe new confusions or new clarity to these issues. Let me start with an example which is always in public discourse and is often a source of confusion. And the term which I want to explore first is profit. Profit to an accountant is simply the excess of revenue over cost. And to an accountant, both revenue and cost are legal categories, determined by rules of classification. Whereas for an economist, profit is an analytical construct referring to any return received by an entrepreneur which is over and above the payment which he should have received in order to take actions which would bring about the necessary production or supply of the relevant goods and services. In more formal language, it is the payment over and above opportunity cost of the opportunity cost of entrepreneurial resources. Introduced into this notion is a conception of cost which has absolutely no relationship to the accountant's notion of cost. However, what happens is economists demonstrate that this type of profit is antithetical to the efficient use of resources and demonstrate very formally that in conditions of optimal resource use, its value should be zero. So in fact, the requirement of zero profit becomes the sine qua non of economists saying that efficient utilization of resources have been achieved. But as I said, there are the disjunction between the economists and accountants creates problem. Let's consider the difference in this definitional disjunction in the context of the return to capital. To an accountant, if the source of capital is equity, then the return on equity is not cost but is a part of profit. Whereas if the source of capital is debt, then interest payments can be treated as cost. This is simply because of a classificatory rule which says that all payments made to owners of the enterprise are part of profit. For an economist, both types of these return can be cost because both of these are necessary payments to secure the availability of capital. So we may ask, how does it matter? To illustrate this, I will take recourse to citing a quotation from a very well-known Supreme Court case in the case of Unni Krishnan versus the state of Andhra Pradesh. In 1993, a 5-judge bench of the Supreme Court held that education, and I will quote, can neither be a trade or business, nor can it be a profession within the meaning of Article 19(1)(g). Trade or business normally connotes an activity carried on with the profit motive. End quote. The judgment then proceeds to state that education should not be provided with a profit motive or be commercialized. Similar views, not just in education, but in a number of spheres of economic and social governance, are stated in numerous statements of government policy as well as of the court. This view has in part, only in part, I'll come to another source of this view a little later, in considerations which are based on the economist's perception of profit being antithetical to efficient resource use. This then leads to the policy dictum that educational institutions must be run on a no profit or no loss basis. But the economist's profit, while it is a useful analytical construct, is unobservable in most practical settings. Thus, the policy is implemented using the accountant's notion of profit. Accounting compliance with zero profit does not imply an economist's notion of zero profit, and the no profit, no loss condition implemented through an accountant's notion of profit is neither sufficient nor necessary for efficient resource use. Compounding this confusion, there is an additional complication. The government and the court have in mind a conception which even goes beyond what the economists had in mind when they talked about profit, because they are trying to assert a much older belief that education, and for that matter a large number of social services, should be provided with altruistic motives. Now, this might be a desirable or a plausible presumption, but has also immense practical concerns. Formally, economists do not work with altruism because the basic cornerstone of altruism is the sublimation of self-interest, whereas a primitive of economic analysis is that an individual is seeking to maximize utility or self-interest. The trouble is, there is enough evidence to suggest that altruism exists. It is, however, difficult to quantify and sometimes difficult to separate from more complex definitions of self-interest, particularly long horizon self-interest. Further, even if pure altruism exists, it is often conflated with older traditional concerns of family, community, and religious identity, each one with their own baggage of social problems. Even if I take all this for granted, there is still no reason to believe that altruism has any statement to make about profit. Because for an altruist, profit is neither bad nor good, and is neither necessary nor is it undesirable. Because an altruist does not seek profit as a goal, but getting a return enables him to expand the scope of altruism. If you wish to get a sense of what this form of behavior may entail, I will refer you to Mahatma Gandhi's work on trusteeship. Mahatma Gandhi, in his conception of trusteeship, had a notion of an altruistic capitalist who does not abjure profit And this is important to understand because in Gandhiji's notion of trusteeship, the business